Hi there, welcome to or welcome back to Tiff Reads Books, where I read books and then I talk to you about them. And today I'm going to be talking about the most recent arc that I finished, and that is Grey Dog by Elliott Gish. I loved this one. This is my first, oh my god, this fucking book of the year. Okay, so I wasn't sure about it in the beginning. It was a little slow. This is a historical horror. Okay, so I find historical stuff to be a little difficult for me. And so this was kind of an out of my comfort zone a little bit, but the fact that it was horror, I was like, okay, it has potential because of the horror aspect. So in Grey Dog, we follow Ada Bird, who is, or Ada Bird. I have never said it out loud. Ada Bird. So we follow her, and she is a 30-year-old woman who is single. So as of the times in 1901, she's considered a spinster, and her dad is basically tired of looking at her, and he's like, go fucking do something. So he sends her off to be a teacher, and something goes a little weird with her most recent teaching post. So she gets sent back home, and then her dad's like, okay, it's time to go do something again. So he sends her out to this other post, and she is a replacement for a teacher who left in a hurry to go take care of her sick mother. There's a small town called Lowry Bridge, and she's got maybe 20 kids in her class that range from the age of 5 to the age of 13. So because it's 1901, it's a single room schoolhouse. We teach everybody. And so she's a little different for the era, but not in a so different type of way, in a way that I appreciated. So she is a nature lover, in the sense that if she was born in a different era, she would have been a naturalist. But this is not the era for her to be able to do that, and she did not grow up in the area or the era where that was possible for her, partially because of her very mentally and physically abusive father. So this is your first content warning, is there are depictions in this book of child abuse from a father figure. So, a literal father. They were not overdone. They weren't done just for the shock value. They were done as a sense of character building. We really got them in a way to build up Ada's character and her beliefs and her actions, and show us her trauma that she'd experienced in the past and why she does certain things that she does now due to the things that she experienced before, which is really nice to not just have a scene thrown in there for shock value. So I really liked the way that was used, and it felt appropriate to the story. So she goes out into the woods when she first gets to this place. After she's done, we sit with her for a while, okay? This is written in first person in a journal format. So we are getting her journal where she's every night she's going home, she's writing what happened about the day, but we do get good dialogue through that. We still get good character interactions. We just get it in the format of a way for us to be in her head and not in the moment. So we get things after she's processed them, which means we also get her thoughts on them after they've happened, which is very fun because of the way the story goes. So after she's kind of met everyone, she goes out into the woods around the schoolhouse and starts looking for things she can keep in the classroom. And she finds this little owl skull, and she puts it in a jar and puts it on her desk. And she uses an example because then she takes the students out for nature walks when they start getting angsty, and she starts getting angsty, and she's like, let's go out in nature. And so she has them collect little bits of moss, and she puts them all in jars around the classroom so that they can make their own little terrarium. And most of the people in Lowry Bridge think this is a little odd, and it's very inappropriate for kids to be learning nature when they're all going to be farmers. And wives. They don't need to know that. They just need to know how to read and how to count, and they're good. That's it. Ada has different beliefs. She thinks that a well-rounded education makes a well-rounded person, and people aren't interesting unless they have interests. So she's trying to cultivate an interest in something in these kids, and people are getting more and more frustrated with that as time goes on, even though she's not really doing a lot of it. They get it rarely, and they still are learning their numbers way better than the last teacher. They're learning to read better. They're learning to write better. They're learning how to speak properly. So one of the busybody moms, because no matter what era we're in, we've got busybody moms, right? So she comes in and she confronts Ada and she's like, how dare you take my son into the woods? How dare you teach him about things dying? He is only 9. He can't handle death. And like, she's like, ma'am, we're in like the 1900s, things die. So the mom's like, I'm gonna write a letter to the school board about you. And Ada's like, you do that, go right ahead. So she does, and the school board comes and visits, and they inspect and they watch her teach and they assess the kids, and they're like, you know what, these kids are actually on track and some of them are a little bit ahead, so you keep doing what you're doing, don't worry about the busybodies. So we're like, okay, cool. Ada gets her first moment of like standing her ground, and some man specifically, because she's been beaten down by men for most of her life, some man to say, you know what, Ada, you're doing a good job, you keep doing you. It was a nice little scene. So she gets a little bit of confidence, and then she makes a friend. She makes a friend with the wife of the minister. And now this is maybe a little spoiler territory. So what I will say from here that's not spoiler is, after she meets this friend, things start happening to her. She starts to think that maybe she's losing her mind. She's hallucinating things. She's seeing things that she swears are very real and very terrifying, and then they're not there anymore. And she can't tell anybody because she's terrified that they'll put her in an institution if she does. And very not nice things happened to women in institutions in the 1900s. So she doesn't want to go. She's like, oh shit, like, I don't know what's happening. This needs to stop. The more time she spends with the minister's wife, the worse things get, until things spiral out of Ada's control. She stops taking care of herself. She stops teaching her students. She starts snapping. Her temper starts rising. And then everything really hits the fan. This is your spoiler thing. Those are your non-spoiler things. If you don't want any spoilers, do not go past here. If you don't mind very mild spoilers, because I'm not going to tell you the ending, because the ending was a what the actual fuck type of thing, but in a good way. I'm not going to tell you that. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of spoilers about some of the things that maybe aren't covered in the synopsis that I think make the book very interesting and give you a lens in which to view it through. So this is your spoiler warning. Thank you for sticking around. If you made it this far and you don't want to go any further, please give the video a like. I appreciate it. If you do want to stick around, I'm going to start talking about spoilers. So Ada is very much dealing with the fact that she is attracted to women. She's not attracted to men. And she doesn't really know what to do with that. She just knows that it's something that they would probably put her in an institution for, and that she can't let anyone know that she has these feelings, but she has them, and they are starting to overwhelm her, where she's afraid she can't control them anymore. So in her being friends with the minister's wife, she's also very attracted to her. She finds her to be a very compelling person, both physically and mentally. They have amazing conversations. They have a lot of shared interests. They both love novels, which the minister finds that his wife should not be reading because they're frivolous and they don't teach anything about God, so she shouldn't be reading them. And Ada kind of starts to get it in her head that potentially the minister's wife feels the same thing about her, but she can't ask her, she can't show her, because if she's wrong, she's fucked. So this is kind of the catalyst for what happens with the woods starting to call to her. So she starts hearing her name called to her out of the woods, and she starts to be slightly terrified because she's hearing voices now, and these things that she's seeing are dead animals lying in front of her. Things like she walks out of the schoolhouse one day and there's a rabbit who's like bitten off its tongue and it's just laying in the snow, or maybe that's out of the church, and it's just laying in the snow, and she stares at it. She's like, oh my god, this is disgusting, and she starts feeling like she's gonna be sick, and then it disappears, it's gone. And then she finds like a wing of a bird just like laying ripped off of a bird. There's no bird in sight, just a wing, like some cat is bringing her gifts, right? Is essentially what it feels like. But at the same time, she's feeling this like presence around her, and the more she starts to try to avoid these feelings, the more she starts to lose herself, to the point where she stops bathing because she can't handle the idea of taking off her clothes or being naked, and she has to bathe. So she stops bathing, and people start commenting on how bad she smells and how ridiculous she's acting. Everyone except for the widow, who lives on the other side of the bridge, and people don't like her because she's a little different and she's a woman who lives on her own. How dare she? So we have some like things where Ada is like drawn to talk to this woman, but the person hosting her does not want her to. The wife of the couple that's hosting her, who are feeding her and housing her and basically taking care of her necessities, because a woman can't live alone in this era, so she has to stay with a host family even though she's 30 years old. So she's like essentially being banned from talking to this widow, even though the widow's like, oh, I think we would have a lot in common. And eventually she decides she's gonna go have a meal with her because she gets caught in the rain, and the woman invites her up, and she's like, I don't understand why nobody likes this woman. She finds her very intelligent, a very good person to talk to, someone who it doesn't seem as uptight as everyone else in town, and she has an expansive library. And so she gives Ada a book, and Ada picks one on like the animal world, basically. It's an entomology book. That's what she picks. She picks an entomology book. And she's like over the moon because no one would ever give her a gift this nice. And this woman just has, because she's like, oh, my husband all bought them for me. I just think they're pretty. I like to read some of them, but I've read them all. Pick one. Like, and I was like, oh my God, that is a good gift from someone you've just met, right? So, especially in the 1900s, books were expensive. They're expensive now, but they were definitely expensive then. So she ends up spending more and more time with this widow, and the more time she spends with the widow, the stronger her feelings towards the minister's wife gets, and then the more she starts to lose herself. And then there's an event that happens where she sees something on a night that she's like helping the minister's wife, whose name I honestly can't remember, so I keep calling her the minister's wife. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. She's like spending time with her, and she gets up to leave, but she thinks she hears like a knocking at the door, and because she hears this knocking at the door, she like throws the door open, and she's like, stop fucking with me, but she doesn't swear, right, basically. So she's like yelling at the woods. So the minister's wife's like, oh no. And so she ends up like backstabbing Ada by writing a letter to the school board, and about how, all this stuff about Ada. She starts gossiping. She's a gossip. She loves to gossip. And so Ada's basically, the more that she's losing her sense of propriety, the worse her paranoia about everyone is getting. And it's one of those feelings of like, Ada, what are you doing? Ada, what are you doing? Ada, what are you doing? Like, it's like this room is closing in, and we're stuck in there with her and experiencing everything that she's experiencing, all because of like all of the rules that she's had forced on her entire life, and everything that she's supposed to like have done and to do, and she's not doing any of them correctly in a way that fits in society, and she just is ready to rage over it. And that brings us to the final, like, last couple chapters of the book, where the rage consumes her, and it was so good. It was so good. And I really like this, and I really want to recommend this. So I saw this picture the other day. I think I can still find it on Instagram. I saw this picture, and it says like the feminine urge to on it. And I was like, oh, that's that book. That is like, it's the mood at the end of the book. Like, she just opens up and just lets everything go and just like tears it down, essentially, in a way. And I don't want to spoil exactly like how it goes about and how it happens, but it's a long ride to get there. The book is 400 pages, and it is written kind of slow, but it's one of those where we spend so much time with the character that we start to really care about her, and we start to spiral with her and see it happen, and it just gives you that sense of impending doom. It's that same type of vibe of Our Wives Under the Sea, where you're just like, oh no, what's happening? Oh no, what's happening? Where nothing is really happening until it happens. So it's a little more payoff than Our Wives Under the Sea had. So if your issue with Our Wives Under the Sea was that there wasn't enough payoff at the end, this one has payoff at the end. We still don't get an explanation of why or what, like a true one, but we get enough. And I really, really enjoyed it. Someone on Storygraph mentioned in their review that they didn't like it until they were talking to their friend about it, and their friend was like, look, you're not viewing it through the right lens, so maybe think about it in terms of that repressed sexuality issue. And then she said she went back and looked at it, and she was like, oh my God, this is really good, right? Because so if you're someone who doesn't think about things through that lens, try thinking about it through that lens. But if you are someone who likes thinking about things from those lens and likes those type of books, and who maybe grew up in an evangelical household where everything like that was repressed, you might really enjoy this, and you might be able to identify with those feelings. And I think that's what did it for me, is growing up Fundy adjacent, where anything to do with sexuality was no, and you acted proper and you did proper, and like and you didn't do things that might have been seen as witchy or devilish or against God or frivolous or things like that, right? So because of that type of thing, I really think that if you grew up with anything like that, you would probably enjoy this. Now, let me give you some like hard content warnings though for this book. If you have an issue with blood and gore, I would not recommend this, because it's pretty okay until the end, but then it does get pretty bloody. So in addition, there is a very, very detailed miscarriage scene, and there is one that is from an animal having a miscarriage, and there's also one from Ada herself giving a first person traumatic memory of her having a miscarriage and then being abused by her father immediately after and during, while she's still dealing with it. So if you are sensitive to those topics, I don't recommend this, because it was a little sickening as someone who doesn't have an issue with that topic. It was still a little like, I felt my stomach churning a little bit because of the way it was described. So like a little clenchy. Like, so if you like horror that gives you that type of stuff, that's very like graphic in that type of sense, you might enjoy those scenes, but if you have issues, I wouldn't recommend it. I did get asked by someone on Instagram too if there was any, like, they were worried about the animal injuries that were listed as one of the content warnings. So there is no straight out animal cruelty in this book. These animals that we experience things happening to, there's one bird that has to be killed because of a severe injury it has. But nothing is done just for the joy of hurting animals. That being said, like I said, there's like a detached wing, there's the rabbit that bites off its tongue, and there's the deer that has the miscarriage. So these are not nice things, but there is no animal cruelty for the sake of cruelty or to advance a plot. We don't actually see any human physically hurting an animal in this book. There is one scene where it's mentioned that kittens were put into a bag and disappeared. And she saw the person carrying the bag towards the river. So there's that, but there's no graphic description of what happened. It was just like oh, that's really sad type of like, that sucks, like type of thing, but there was no graphic description of it. So those are your biggest content warnings. And like I said, there is physical abuse from a parent as well in here, and also one other scene of child abuse that's very quick, and obviously sexism and misogyny and things like that. But those are the major ones. So definitely, if you're going to read this, I recommend Storygraph, because they have a thing with content warnings listed, user added content warnings. So you can go to the books page, scroll down to the bottom, click content warnings, and it'll show you the top 3, but then you can click see all, and it will show you every single content warning that anybody has clicked and the number of people that have selected it. So you can see maybe how big of a thing. It also lists it as like graphic, moderate, and mild. So if you've never used Storygraph, I'm gonna put a screenshot of it up here, because it's really, really useful. So I recommend checking that out if you're going to check out the book and you are uncomfortable with certain topics. And I do think that even if you aren't necessarily super uncomfortable, it's always good to know what you're getting into going into a book if you're worried that something might set you off. I fully am a proponent of that as someone who had to put down juniper and thorn because of the binge eating and body dysmorphia thoughts that she had were too on track with mine at the moment. So, all right. A very, very good sapphic horror. Very good. Historical sapphic horror with a lot of feminine rage. So it comes out April 4th. It is Elliott Gish's debut novel, and it is so, so, so good.